Good morning. Welcome to Abrasive Proud of It Live. I'm Mike Z.
I'm that guy.
And today we're going to be talking Finishing Friday. So what we're going to be covering is storyboards. Storyboards are one of those things that I think are very important for anyone who's doing any kind of finishing, that if you have to relay a finish to the customer, something where they're like, they don't really know maybe what stain color they want or what finish as in sheen they want, but a storyboard is very helpful for you to give the customer an actual finished piece that they can then decide whether or not that's what they want to do. Plus, you can write down all the steps that you did to that. So therefore, you can recreate that. Like if you're doing something big, like say a bookcase or something, it's going to be about 3 months, then at least you can replicate what you showed the customer.
Oh yeah, they're important. I've used them quite a bit for several projects. It helps me identify really what grit I'm going to stop at, what the color is going to look like when I stain it at that.
Mm-hmm.
It helps me decide even sometimes what's the best stain for my application.
So I'll just bring it up here now. So I've done this one earlier to kind of show you the idea of a storyboard. And so what you have here is that we did 80 grit and we sanded the entire board all the way down with 80 grit. Okay, so everything has been done with 80. Then at this kerf line, which I just did with a chop saw, I just put a stop line into it. I did 120 grit from here all the way down. Then I did 180 grit the rest of the way, and then here I ended at 320. And what that does is that when you hand this to your customer, they may say, well, I like the darkness of this right here. So at least you have an idea of where you need to be. Sometimes you can do 150 to still achieve that, but sometimes you want to have that 180 to make it a little bit more of an even coverage of stain. And then obviously 320 is very fine. You've closed off the grain, and that will then cause issues with blotching. But sometimes customers like that look. Sometimes they want a lighter highlighted surface. So at least you can give them the options. And all you had to do, this is the same stain color, same amount of lacquer. The only thing that's different is the sanding progression stopping points. So that kind of helps you give one variable to the entire process instead of here's 20 different stain colors on one board. The problem I have with that is that some colors change how others look. This way the customer said, I like that color. So then you can take a scrap piece. And the most important thing out of all this, try to take a scrap piece from the project that you're going to be doing. Something maybe if you have a lumber yard or you come into your local Klingsports woodworking shop and they have several 100 board feet on the wall, that you buy a small portion of that batch. That way it'll be similar. So that's another helpful tip.
So what you're saying is don't stain oak if you're going to be using maple.
It would be a highly good idea to use the same species, let alone from the same batch. Yes.
Yeah, okay, I got you.
So that's a storyboard. And then, of course, you can write it on the back if you want to, what the steps were, what stain you used, everything to pretty much tell you, okay, this is what we're doing. Now, if you want to keep this, which is really nice because obviously you invested the time, now you have future storyboards for customers where you can say, hey, here's your sample, check it out. Now, we were using scrap out of our bargain bin. If you haven't been to one of our stores, we have these large bargain wood bins. And so this was, I think it's $1.50 a pound for one of these. And so I grabbed that, and I have a couple others. And we're actually going to show you the process that I do to get this look and how fast it can be.
Now, Mike, talk to them and explain to them why you're getting such a light color on the 320 and so dark down there on the 80.
Okay. So 90% of your wood's out there that as soon as you go past 220, so you're sanding finer than 220, you close off the grain and the pores of the grain. And what that does is it makes it very smooth. You pretty much, they call it a process of burnishing, and burnishing is polishing. So at 320, you can see that the stain did not take as well. It's very light in color, where the 180 still has a nice depth of the stain. Okay. And then as you go higher, I've seen some people do 1,000 grit, then they stain. I don't see a point to it because it's a little too fine in that case. And then, of course, if you miss any areas, like right here, you can see where I didn't sand as well. It's a little darker in general where the 180 touched. Then, of course, you're going to have those highlighted and shown. So anytime I do any sanding at all, I typically stop at about 180. It gives you a nice even coverage. If you want a little lighter, you can do 220. There's a couple of cases where I'll go finer, and that's usually cherry, but I'm trying to get a particular look of distressed cherry. So I'll sand it up to 400, then I beat it up, distress it, and then I stain. And then that way the cherry is taking that antiqued, aged look, as well as the stains hanging up in the distress marks. But that's really the only time that I ever do anything finer than 220 on bare wood.
Yeah, so don't close that grain off too much or you're going to wind up high colors.
High color, yeah, you better watch how you say that.
Yeah.
So And then also you can see the sheen difference here. This is just one coat of lacquer. And the reason we did that is so you can see how dull this is. And then progressively, because you're closing off the pores, you're getting finer and finer. So your lacquer takes. Ooh, let me do that. Oh yeah. Anyways, all right. So I'm going to angle this down. Welcome to the workbench. And coffee. All right, welcome to my waistline. So I've got my 4 sections, 3 cuts, and what we're going to start with is an 80 grit aluminum zirconia. Good morning, Roberta and Chuck. AZ Plus, I like it in the 80 grit because it will do a very quick of sanding over pretty much any wood surface that you have. Good quick removal. It's a bit on the aggressive side, so if you do plan on staining, you'll want to make sure to come back with aluminum oxide because you'll get swirl marks from this.
It looks like that came out of that sample pack that we offered.
Yes, it did. As a matter of fact, all of these fantastic discs came out of the sample pack. The SAM 6x15 is made for Bosch, Makita, any 6-inch 6-hole, 6-inch 15-hole, and then of course any fest tool it will work on. I got a dent right there, but we'll make that 80 grits, won't matter.
So, Mike, I noticed you were putting a lot of pressure and putting a lot of weight bearing down and grinding on that piece of wood.
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I put very little weight and pressure on it. I let the weight of the sander do the job. If you have a board, I'll just do this real quick here. Very little pressure will get you the results if you're using the correct grit. If you're doing this process, which I'm about to show you, you will cause yourself more headache later in the finishing process. While it looks sanded, it's very uneven. There's a lot of times where I push down so hard that the pad stopped and made zigzag lines. You also get pigtails. So whenever you push down and think you're sanding faster because you're putting force down, you're actually doing yourself an injustice by not leveling the surface properly. Let's get back to the way to do it.
Cool. Looks like you got something on your 80 grit.
Thanks for noticing that, Chris.
It's like you dribbled your stain earlier.
It is a possibility. So next I'm going to do 120 grit. And this is our new Green Tech material, specially treated for non-loading situations. But on bare wood, it lasts a really long time. All right, so what you'll notice is that I left the 80 alone. I did not touch that. I did 120 the rest of the way down the board. Now we'll do 180. Also, whenever you're sanding, it's on, off, off. Don't try to that doesn't do anything but hurt your sander.
Leaves your wood a mess too.
Yes, it does. It's on low. Yeah, I did that on purpose. I will touch on that since you noticed it. I'm running the Festool sander and I've got the back hooked up to it, but I have it set to the turtle or the low mode. That is because if you have too much suction going to the sander, you're actually going to pull the sander down to the wood, causing the sander to work harder and get you swirl marks. You let up on the pressure, it has enough to capture all the dust that you need to capture, but at the same time, let's do that as a test. This is on the low setting with 320 grit. Go ahead and just do it manual, please. Manual. All right, so you want just enough to barely pick up the paper. Okay, now go ahead and put it to mega mode. Okay, thanks, sir. Appreciate your cooperation there. What that does is it will try to make the sander work harder by having too much suction. So then you lose airflow, which is what you want.
The other downside with having the vacuum on is as you're sanding, and I'll flip this over so we don't ruin what you've done. As you're sanding, if the vacuum is pulling this down to the workpiece, you're going to get a lot of this hoppy
Vibration, yeah.
And what that does is that's doing nothing but generating even more swirl and more scratches in the surface. So you want this thing to glide across, almost like air hockey. You know, you want that thing to just smoothly glide across the surface. If it's bouncing because it's being sucked down to the surface, it's just going to drastically affect the outcome and the quality of the finish.
So if you're one of those shops where you don't have obviously a variable speed vacuum available and you have a shop vac, I highly recommend that they make hoses now that either have like a suction limiter or I guess a resistor on it that basically opens it up and causes less suction to be at the tool, or that, or just simply cut an area and then put tape over it, depending on basically how redneck you want to get it. But the less suction that you have going to the sander when you're sanding, and especially the finer grits, you'll have a much better dust control situation. Which I don't know if you can tell on the bench, but it's just a little bit has fallen off the disc, which is fine. It's not airborne. Now that I've restained that, paper towel, please. That's right there. And apparently I locked it back down. No. Pardon us 1 second. Chris, why don't you talk about something entertaining?
Well, yeah, we won't say what Mike used to open the can of stain, but needless to say, we may not have power soon.
Power cord's working a pinch. What do you want? All right, so
you might want to let the dust off that since you flipped it over.
Well, in a second. 80, 120, 180, 320, and yeah, it's definitely a lot finer. Now, of course, as you can tell when I wipe my hand across it, I have dust on there. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and wipe that down real quick. You don't have to flood it with water. You don't have to do any of that stuff. And you can tell that, I don't know if you can see it, there's definitely a little bit of dust on there. Oh, no, you're fine. Just flip it over. So this is not how I normally stain everything, but for a sample piece I will. But I will say that whenever you're staining anything, try to run circles when you're wiping it into the grate. And this will help get your coverage in everywhere evenly without wasting a bunch of stain on the surface.
Kind of like we do our competition. We run circles around it.
That's right, we do. Suckers. Then obviously you always have to come back with the grain to wipe up your final wipe. And one thing I will recommend is that you don't push down really hard when you're trying to wipe up stain. You're just trying to get the excess off.
Gosh, Mike, I noticed you're not wearing gloves.
That is correct. I have finally made a decision that gloves, for the most part, cost me a lot of money in finishing. So instead, I use the Cresco hand washing solvent and get all that off of it.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot cheaper than gloves.
Professional tip.
Use the gloves for other means today instead of finishing. 320, 180, 120, and 80. We'll get that close. All right, so it doesn't look like there's much difference between the 80 and the 120, but there really is. The camera's not picking it up as much, but you can definitely tell that there's more evenness in the grain right here. Nah, that'd be fine like that. There's a lot more evenness in the 180 range, and then of course the 320 is just super light, and the stain did not take the right color. But that's how you create a storyboard. Then of course you put down whatever finish that you're going to have for the customer. I always recommend satin. And the reason I recommend satin is because it's middle of the road. If the customer decides that they would like a glossier finish, then you now know you can go semi-gloss gloss. If they say it's too shiny and you want duller, then of course you can go matte and flat. But satin's a good middle of the road sample board piece, and that'll kind of help tell you what the customer wants as well, because sheen and shine are two different things. So what do you think? Did I cover it, Chris? Do you now understand?
Yeah, you covered it with stain.
Yeah. Look at that sweet banner, folks. Our boss finally understood that, it makes sense.
Hey, Mike, did you know we're live?
Oh, we are now.
Either that or we're live. I'm not sure.
I think with that, you know what? Either way, we are alive. Yeah. We'll just take a moment for that corniness to pass.
Yeah, all right. It's done.
Thank you. So thank you very much for joining us on Abrasive Proud of It Live Finishing Fridays. Today we're talking storyboards and how you can achieve a good finish to show your customer to get that approval that you need. I'm Mike Z.
I'm Chris. Sand it, stain it, finish it with anything from Clean Sports Woodworking Shop.
Did you write that down all by yourself?
I didn't. I just kind of came to me. That's probably why it wasn't that great.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you guys have a great day.
See you next time.